Good evening, Canadian Awareness family. Welcome to another episode of Canadian Awareness Podcast. My name is Anthony. I'm an extra dimensional channeler out of Toronto, Canada. And tonight I have someone very special because he specializes in certain subjects that I'm extremely passionate about. I always have been one of my favorite subjects. Ancient sites, ancient civilizations, but also crop circles. This gentleman, certainly in my opinion, is one of the top 3 people when it comes to crop circles. This gentleman's name is Freddie Silva. And Freddie comes to us this evening from Maine, United States. And he certainly is one of the best authors that has published 6 different books, great books, on 6 different languages, 3 of which I own. And those are Lost Art of Resurrection, Sacred Fields, and The Missing Lands. Freddie is definitely a leading researcher in today's industry of ancient civilizations, but also ancient secrets and all of these hidden and restricted histories that come along with those concepts, world sacred sites, but also how do these sites connect to consciousness. He clearly demonstrates it in his research and in his books. And he's also one of the world's leading experts on crop circles. I mean, crop circles have been my passion for a long time. I've enjoyed studying it. I've done a couple of videos on it. But Freddie certainly lays it out on a whole different level, but also what's hidden inside of these patterns, these authentic crop circle patterns, the intelligence within them. And then he translates them with actual evidence and proof that these are not man-made, and they've never been man-made, of course. In addition to being a great author, Freddie has actually produced over 14 different documentaries, and they're available on his website, and one of the most reputable metaphysical speakers in the industry. That's how we need to label this gentleman. This is what he is. And his speakings, his teachings, his presentations have been featured on Gaia TV, YouTube, multiple different podcasts, Discovery Channel, the History Channel, BBC, just to name a few. And another interesting thing about Freddie, he really lives the lifestyle. He does walk the walk. So he leads private tours all around the world, sacred sites, pyramids, a variety of different countries, including all across Europe and in Egypt. And this all can be visible on his website, invisibletemple.com or freddysilva.com. So this gentleman with 3 passports, as he proudly brags about, former guitar player, Portuguese born, I bring in now Freddie Silva into the studio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anthony. Hello, Toronto and to the world.
So you just got back from a tour.
Yeah, just to relax, I like to lead tours for fun. Drive people down long shafts of pyramids backwards and get them to see the world in a very different way. In fact, it's nice to see people change their perception of who they are in reality in 10 days. And I always tell the people, if you're going to come all the way to Egypt or wherever I take you, leave the world behind. Don't look at your cell phone, don't look at the news. And in 10 days, you'll find, if you do this properly, you'll get back to the airport and you'll find the world is a very jarring place. The noise and then all the notices of surveillance and the fact that there's a security alert and there's lots of, cameras and television screens anywhere, driving you slowly crazy. And you realize that you actually, for 10 days, have complete control over the life around you. And that's the whole point, to show you that these places that we go to, these old temples, do not only have a profound effect on you, but they can also lead you to have a much more personal experience in your modern world and, change the modern world and adapt it to your own needs, not adapt yourself to the modern world, which is where I think a lot of people are getting so out of control, getting so today.
That's amazing. I've heard a lot about your tours, to be honest, and I don't know anyone personally that's gone to your tour, but I've seen videos of the tour and I've just seen the magnificent effects post-tour, what people say. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So I'll ask you, what would be an avenue, aside from your website, invisibletemple.com, what would be an avenue for someone to book your tour? But more importantly, how long are these tours? And are they all inclusive tours or are they just guided tours? Do you guys travel as a group? Tell me a little bit about it.
You basically go on my website and send me an email, and I'll put you on my mailing list. And for Egypt, there's 350 people on a waiting list. And basically, we send out a nice little blast. Hopefully, you're in the right time zone when it goes out. And then, the first 20 people that book, you're in. I like to lead small groups. I want to make it a bit personal. I don't do tourism. And the idea is that for about 10 days, depending on where we're going, I also do Peru, Bolivia, Portugal is coming up, and that's already got 70 people lined up. We think that it's going to sell out in 6.5 minutes. And then I spoil you. Not only do I take you back thousands of years into the past, but show you a kind of history that you usually don't get to hear about. And it's not my own fantasy, this is research. And put you center stage of these temple experiences where you become the focal point of the temple, not that the temple becomes the focal point. It's about your interaction with sacred space and what it does for you and to you. And if I've done my job properly, and 10 days later, you walk out feeling a very different person and much more connected with the nature of who you really are and what you've come here to do. And I see that a lot in people, especially if they come with an open mind and they change their habits, the way they live, the way they think. And a year later, they're very, very different people. So that's essentially what we do. And I also spoil people rotten. I always find the best hotels and usually places that are a little bit out of the way, so we're not mobbed with tons of people, because the idea is to have peace and quiet when we possibly can in this chaotic world and go back a bit more refreshed.
That's very impressive. Now, what are some of the tours that are coming up now in 2023?
I'm just doing Egypt and Portugal for now. I figured that 2022 and this year, possibly next year, is going to be difficult. First of all, I've figured out that after COVID, people are going to be quite angry. They want to lash out at anyone that has absolutely no connection with their personal issues, and they want to make up for lost time. And I see a lot of problems, especially on the last tour with Egypt. I saw so many people at the sites. I've never seen it before. And I've been doing this for almost 2 decades. The places were packed. People were angry. They're shoving. There was almost a fist fight inside one of the tombs in the King's Valley, which I've never seen before. People can't even line up in a queue and be patient. And I figured, yep, that's the problem when you shut people up for 2 years, rightly or wrongly. It's not meant for me to judge, but yeah, people were going to take it out and their frustration. And I saw it. And also things are much more expensive. People are becoming much more, let's say, adamant that they want to get their money's worth and then a whole lot more. So I'm going to sort of take a backstage while all this is happening and then get back to doing maybe 5 tours every year. We used to do Peru as well. Now, if we can get Sardinia put into the mix, it's a place that many people go to. And I feel that it's time that we showed what was going on in ancient Sardinia, but always something to challenge me as well.
The Giza Pyramid, I've had a pleasure to go there one time in 2019, I believe, to do a 5-day stay, to do my own study, an amateur study on the Giza Pyramids, as I've studied them for a long time. One of the things that I certainly remember, and it's fascinating about your story, is that you said you've had an out-of-body experience, you've had an interaction or encounter with consciousnesses, or let's call them beings or entities from the 4th density or whichever density you think they came from. Would you be able to elaborate on that, what you're allowed to disclose or say, or you're willing to talk about? Who were the consciousnesses you connected to in the upper chamber, specifically in the King's Chamber?
So this goes back about 2 decades when I was first going to Egypt, and I had just finished writing the book on crop circles. I'd had some unusual experiences inside one of them where I was levitated and taken out of body, met some very interesting people, 7 of them, and they were dressed in this wonderful sort of satin, sort of monk's gown kind of look. And I didn't even think that kind of stuff was even possible. So I wrote about this in the book. I thought it was an interesting experience because after that, I began to writing feverishly, and that's essentially what became the foundation for this book that I never had any intention of writing, that becomes an international bestseller. So obviously something was going on. And then years later, we'd go to the Great Pyramid, my first time with my group, who does a lot of cleaning up of, let's say, the garbage that people leave behind in sacred space, which is usually their negative energy, and it has a very detrimental effect on sacred space. So we have some techniques to get rid of all of that. But this is one of those unusual experiences where we're in the Great Pyramid and we could not secure private time, which means that you're there with 100 screaming people. And the Great Pyramid, if you've not been in there, it's a very finely tuned resonator. I mean, very seriously finely tuned, according to the original music scale. You drop a pin and the whole place vibrates. It's you don't even talk very loud in there. You almost breathe very quietly. So there's this cacophony going on around us. And next thing you know, 4 of us actually managed to get into the building. 4 guys for a change. It's usually women who like to do this kind of work. And everybody left the building. And we thought, well, that's unusual. Well, good. Well, while there's nobody here, let's have a chance to do what we usually do. And we'll do a bit of toning to clear the room, reset the whole chamber. And the lights went off. So we're in complete darkness. I mean, it's pitch black. And 4 guys are doing sounds with their voice that I've never heard them ever do, or myself for that matter. And as clear as I'm seeing the screen right now, these 30 odd people, the same people that I saw after being levitated in the crop circle, came out of the stone and surrounded us. And I saw them as clear as daylight. And they sort of, bowed like this, and I bowed back, and I thought, when I'm toning, I hope someone else can see this. This can't be just a figment of my imagination. And it went on for quite a while. I want to say about 10, 15 minutes. And then the lights came back on, and we took turns going into the box. I won't call it a sarcophagus because no one's ever buried there. And within a few seconds, you're gone. I mean, you've left the body in that box, and then you get brought back, and it's been a lifetime away, an incredible journey through this sort of wormhole. The only way I can describe it. And again, I have no idea that this stuff is even possible. I'm just learning my craft at this point. And afterwards, there's 4 dazed grown-ups leave the building, and we're looking at each other, and you think, what's going on here? Because was I the only person that's sort of going crazy? Did I really see this? And the other guys actually chipped in and said, actually, there's a moment where you said something, and these people came out of the stones. And the other guy says, yeah, and they were really tall. They were dressed in these sort of white gowns. And we all looked at us and we went, okay, so it happened. It wasn't just me. That actually happened. And in complete darkness, we said, yeah. And I'll tell you, that moment, that changes your life. It really, really does. And when I was putting down my experience on paper for my second book, I wondered, it would be really cool if I could find someone else who had a similar experience. So it's not just coming from me. And I had, part of my library behind me, a tiny part of the library. There's a book in there from a guy called Paul Brunton, who, like me, was a kind of an inquiring skeptic, and he got fed up with the modern world in 1920. He couldn't actually foresee any good coming out of the modern world back then. And he went walkabout. He went asking questions. And one of his books was In Secret Egypt. And I thought, well, I've had this book in the library forever. I wonder if he had a very similar experience. And sure enough, he actually bought himself a whole night in the Great Pyramid. And would you believe that he actually describes the same people that I saw in intimate detail, who then took him for the whole night through all these extra chambers, which they've only just now discovered using the latest technology that are to get in there. So he was actually 100 years ahead of the game. And he describes the chambers, what's in them, the people that he met. But all of these things are exactly what I experienced. And so that gave me credibility, but also made his report very credible. And I've since bought many of his books. And I've since found that people working with sound engineering in the Great Pyramid have also seen these people when they hit a certain note in that building. It's as if the note itself is a kind of a tripwire that releases a kind of pin that allows dimensions to cross in that building, which I believe is actually what the building was originally used for, and probably the only reason why people have those kinds of experiences in that building alone.
Recently, you were on a documentary with Billy Carson. A bunch of other guys were there, Jimmy Church and Roderick Martin, who's a friend of mine, who placed that black satellite in our atmosphere. How old is that satellite? And what would you say today? Is it alive? Is it not alive, functioning or not? What's your opinion on that?
Personally, I think that it was a piece of debris that actually fell off the actual main satellite and been floating around. Yeah, I don't totally agree with the whole thing that there's an Anunnaki invading satellite suddenly in the rotation of the Earth. I mean, people are welcome to their opinion. I just don't buy it. It's a bit far-fetched, and two, I was looking at NASA's version of the story, and I said, actually, it's a piece of equipment that just broke off during the docking stage, and it just flew out there. That's all it is. I thought, that makes a lot of sense. Because, first of all, the Anunnaki are no longer alive. That's one big problem. They were around a long, long time ago. But that doesn't mean that the opposite might also be true. I just haven't been bowled over by the evidence, that's all. I'm not saying that my view is true. I'm just not convinced yet by everything that I've heard so far in all the arguments. So it's out there. The truth is out there at the moment, and that's the way it is. That's why I like hanging out with Billy. We don't always agree on everything, but he's a nice guy and his heart's in the right place, so I support him. And that's why he had me on the show to give me my particular background on who the Anunnaki really were. They were not nasty people. That's a Sitchin mindset. And he was totally wrong about them. And not that he was wrong about everything. It's just that he manufactured a lot of the interpretations of Sumerian to fit the theory. You don't do that because that gets into a lot of trouble. But at the same time, if it wasn't for people like Sitchin, I wouldn't be here now because he got my interest in things like that. So again, and the more that I researched parts which overlap his material, the more I realized, yeah, he kind of got about 50% wrong, but he got 50% right, and that's pretty cool. You know, I mean, if you can get to 50%, you're doing pretty well. But yeah, in terms of the satellite, I want to see a bit more hard evidence before I sort of stick my neck out a little bit more. I like to see things. I like to see the big picture first of all. But so far, it's good entertainment, you know.
I agree with much what you said. Probably one difference on that I would disagree, and very respectfully I say this, is that I definitely do believe that this is a very ancient Anunnaki technology. I agree with you strongly, and I can definitely speak to you off camera about who were the Anunnakis from an extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional point of view, where they came from.
Where is it?
They're definitely not normal. They're no longer reincarnated. They're no longer alive. They have nothing to do in any way, shape, or form with Earth today, and nor do they control the black satellite. I certainly do believe that the black satellite is not just some meteor, some rock that's lingering around. No, based on my understanding, based on my firm belief, this certainly was part of their technology, a spy satellite, and there's not just one. As far as the part you mentioned about the Anunnakis, I'm glad you said that. Most people today, due to the misinformation and disinformation, or the combination of the two, and in some cases in ignorance as well, they do firmly believe that the Anunnakis, the Enlil, the Enki, are coming tomorrow, to rescue certain humans, which is beyond inaccurate. They're no longer around. They have nothing to do with Earth, actually.
Yeah, fundamentalist Christians. Here's the Anunnaki people. Have a chat. Yeah, it's the same concept. But no, you have to go and understand what the Anunnaki really were. And I only really got to grips with the concept when I was writing The Missing Lands. And then when I began to actually look at the material for the book on Scotland, where I had to suddenly realize how did the civilization in Scotland end up where it was. And it's a very anomalous civilization. And then start asking questions in the Mediterranean. And by the time I got finished with Sardinia, I ended up in Armenia, and that's where you find the answers to the Anunnaki. And there they're called the people of Ara. They're still called them today. Ara is the sky god. It's the same as Ra in Egypt. In fact, the two cultures are pretty much interchangeable. But once you start getting out of Armenia down to Sumeria, India, the Near East, because of the way the language moves and it forms to a different palette depending on your genetics, then Ara becomes Aru, Anu, Ani, Ana, depending on where you, by the time you get to Greece, it's Dana, and so forth. So it's essentially the same concept, but they're essentially the sky god. But there were people here on Earth who were described as human-like, not quite human, who, they're humanoids. And they seem to be always associated with Orion. Every time you talk about these people who are here living a parallel civilization 12,000 years ago, every indigenous people says, yeah, at one point they came from Orion, or they originated there, or they used to travel between Orion and Earth, and then they forgot how to do it, which brings us back to the black satellite, by the way. And then, they built monuments to try and replicate the kind of forces capable of taking a physical body to where they once used to come from. But we're talking about 12,000 years ago. And after the flood hit, not many of them survived. The few that did found themselves on coastlines around the world, hanging out with people like us and saying, well, we're all going to die unless we interbreed and unless we give you what we know and allow humans to get a quick forward understanding of the accoutrements of civilization. And that's why around 8,500, 9,000 BC, in specific parts around the world, humans spontaneously discovered civilization. And that's the moment where you get the stories about interacting with these very unusual people. And in the Middle East, they were called people of Anu, the Anunnaki. By the time they end up in the Pacific, they're the Tuanaki. And I found that story in the Cook Islands. And you'll have to look at the Cook Islands on Google Earth because, first of all, they're tiny, and two, they're almost indistinguishable from the Pacific. They're barely above sea level. And I had the pleasure of getting hold, or in fact, I don't even know how it worked out. There was some strange coincidence. I was put in touch with the last surviving wisdom keeper of the Cook Islands, and he was very open when I said, look, I'm trying to write about the ancient civilization when our predecessors rubbed shoulders with a parallel civilization. I want to hear it from their point of view. I want to tell the story from their words, not historians, not me, not academics. Let's go back to the people who were there, who lived during those days. And he was very open. He said, please publish this because we're all about to, well, die. We're losing our land. And I'm the last person who remembers this stuff. And I remember when the Annunaki used to be here in the Cook Islands around 3000 BC. And I said, well, that's not the period I'm looking at. There was a rise in sea level 5,000 years ago. We know that, but not to the degree that it wiped out so much landmass. That was in 9,700 BC at the end of the Younger Dryas. And he said, well, they used to come from the Middle East to the Cook Islands, God knows why. And they settled here for a long, long time. But before that, they used to have their own island. It was a big sort of island nation where they used to live. And it no longer exists. It didn't survive the rising sea levels. I said, well, do you know where this is? Because we never really found. I mean, Sitchin kind of went around the perimeter of the concept of where the Anunnaki used to live. It's been a lot of hearsay, a lot of ideas, hypotheses, but no one's really nailed it, which of course only makes me work even harder to try and find it. I thought it was somewhere in the Persian Gulf. All indications of the geology, that the way that the Sumerian texts talk about the homeland seems to implicate the Gulf, but also somewhere in the Armenian highlands. And I'm pretty close to figuring that one out. But he said, no, this island went down at the same time that the sea level rose, but because there's a quid pro quo in terms of geology, part of the earth also went up. So the island went down somewhere in the Indian Ocean, and then we get the rise out of the ocean of the Arabian Peninsula. This is why they lost all of their water and they turned into a desert within the living memory of these people. So you can't find it anymore. It's gone. But it was that's where most of the time the Anunnaki used to hang out. And again, they looked just like us. They were just much taller, lighter skinned. Sometimes they had the elongated skull. They had red hair and green eyes. And again, that puts you somewhere in the region of the Armenian highlands. So it's a very complicated story. But now we have these people living in the middle of the Pacific that should have been somewhere in Sumeria. I had no idea that was even coming.
One of the most interesting things in relation to Anunnakis, I always wanted to know, as a researcher, as a junior researcher compared to you, and I'm in my mid-40s, and I wanted to always know the true story of the Anunnakis. And today, even after everything I know, I would still say there is no human on earth that can tell you 100% who they were, where did they go, how long did they stay for, what did they look like, the percentages of DNA.
Yeah.
And we can estimate, we can guesstimate, and there's obviously intelligent conclusions. There's research, just as yourself and other researchers of your caliber in your own group, within your own industry. And then there's opinions of people that I believe think that they talk to Enlil or Enki, people that imagine that the dream state related scenarios or projections are of Enlil and Enki. This is, I think, where I would come in and perhaps criticize these individuals, that I would disagree with them, that Enlil and Enki are, first and foremost, those are not their ancient names, but they're no longer reincarnated in any way. They have nothing to do with Earth. And the madness, I think, this addiction of Anunnaki being involved with so many humans today, I honestly think needs to stop. It's not going anywhere. It just, this madness needs to stop.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's right. But I mean, again, if you look at this, I mean, what I do, I look at comparative mythology and folklore. And it's amazing what happens when you just sit back and look at different people from different parts of the world that you don't think have anything related to each other, but they do, because the stories actually overlap. And that's what I find exciting, because I take the original book of Enoch, which is essentially, Enoch is a made-up name, by the way, by the Hebrews. His real name was Emet or Anu. He was one of the Anunnaki, which accounts for the fact that, unlike hunter-gatherers, he knew how to write, and he could tell a good story. The problem is that you had translation into Hebrew from Aramaic and Babylonian of a dead language called Sumerian, so there are errors creeping in. But now that we have more people who understand Sumerian and that they can look at the original tablets, there's a lot of information in there about who they were. And when I was writing The Missing Lands, I was really taken aback. In fact, it was a very emotional read when you just take away the whole biblical interpretation of it, because it's very much politicized in terms of favoring the Hebrew Jewish people over these devil gods, because someone had to be the devil. Let's face it. If you're trying to make your religion the big guy, just like the Babylonians had done before the Jews as well. I mean, they were also making the Sumerians the bad people and making the Babylonians to be the good people, which is, of course, the pot calling the kettle black. And then the Hebrews come along, take the story from the Babylonians, and they put in a lot of prejudices of their own. Everybody's doing this whole thing. The truth is to go back to the original story, and the original story is very emotional. So we have a moment where the, let's see, make this into a short story because it's a very long story. We have a moment in time where just after the beginning of the Younger Dryas, so we're now basically in an ice age. The only livable parts of the earth are pretty much around the tropics. It's a very narrow place to live. And we had the lords of Anu who were basically saying to the intermediary between them and the hunter-gatherers, and these are called the Watchers, by the way. And they said, look, here's the thing. We're genetically different to these people, and that humans have the right to develop at their own pace. We've been around a lot longer. We know a lot more things. And there's some things you could just not teach people who are still developing because it creates a true imbalance. We can suggest things. The Watchers can go down and hang out with humans and say, look, if you mix these two types of plants, you can actually make wheat that you could actually crush, and you can make bread out of it. And then you leave and you let humans figure things out for themselves. And that was the minimum contact that was supposed to happen. But for reasons that we don't know, because the book is, parts of the book are obviously missing, is that there was a small group of the Watchers who decided that, hey, Earth girls look really cool. And frankly, if I lived around, Palestine and Lebanon and all those areas around the Near East, I totally agree. There's some beautiful looking women down there. So I figured, all things being equal, these people probably figured, hey, why are we living on this estate? It sounded like they were living on a mountain, quite remote location. And we're here working, and everybody's down by the beach having a good time. We're going to hang out with human women, and we're going to copulate with them. Well, that was a terrible mistake, because the genetic makeup of hunter-gatherers and these people was very different, and that was a big warning to them. And what came out of the union was that most of the time, the children were born the size of infants. Again, these people were 8.5 feet tall. If we take the account that's written at the Temple of Edfu in Egypt, and also the giants' graves that we found throughout the whole of Britain and France, the skeletons have been found to prove that they were much taller. And so when you have a tall person, a tall guy mating with an average-sized human woman from the Near East, you're going to have problems. And the Wichita of Oklahoma to this very day have in their folk tradition that a time when the gods were copulating and taking women, not by force, they would say, hey, I really like this woman, I want her to be my wife. They'll say, well, in the event of good relations, absolutely. If she wants to go with you, she'll go. The problem is, they said that the women died during childbirth. There was a lot of problems with this. So there was another break in the story that Ahmed Urami is telling us, which is really agonizing, because you want to follow the trail of logic that is going here. And maybe one day we'll find it. And next thing you know, there's some experimentation going. And this is where Sitchin kind of brought it up. And I think he was pretty right about this. There seems to be a suggestion that they, in order to survive the cataclysm, because most of the gods died as well, they had to find a way to breed with the surviving humans, because there were so few people on either side that were left. It was a matter of survival on either side. And I think at some point they actually succeeded, but the problem was that the genetic problem was still there at the beginning, where the children that succeeded in giving birth, they gave birth to other children, and they were the real problem. Now, the second iteration of the birth or the mating between humans and Anunnaki, or should I say the Watchers, resulted in these things called the Nephila, which means the children of Orion. And these were seriously tall, giant people, 12 feet tall. They're still living on the Solomon Islands today, according to some of the reports that we know from military people that live there. And military people don't make up this stuff, by the way. And the villagers are saying, yeah, we're very respectful of them. They look like these enormous apes covered with red hair, but they're humans. They're part of a once big civilization that wants to cover the earth. Well, that's exactly what Emmett Urano was saying. He's in the council with the lords of Anu, and he's basically working down what they're saying. And the lords of Anu are looking at the earth, saying, "You know, we've got a bit of a problem here. We have these children of the bastards, of the sons of the Watchers, this small group of people who defied orders, who are now basically running amok across the face of the earth. They eat people for fun. They're teaching humans warfare. They're teaching the things that you really shouldn't teach people when they're still not sufficiently developed. And this is a problem." So they sent out the remaining Watchers to capture these illegitimate children and basically put them in penal colonies because, and it says so in the texts, that they were running out of space. That these people were copulating so much that humans literally were not only being taken over physically, but they're also being eaten for supper. So they said, humans are not going to make it here. This is their planet. So there's one terrible agonizing moment where there's a council that takes place with the head Watchers. And by the way, all these people, their nickname, their collective nickname was Shining Ones because A, they apply the kind of sunscreen lotion to their skin, which made it very luminous, like a sunscreen. Like they said, they were lighter skinned people. It gave them a certain shine, but also because they were much more intellectually developed. Anyone who has a certain intellect usually has a bit of a glow about them, don't they? So there's a certain shine about them. So it's a very apt description for these people. So they're in council and they got together with the astronomers and they said, look, we need to project what's going on in the next couple of 100 years. We need to figure out how to wipe out all these red-haired giants populating and taking over the earth. And they came to this agonizing decision that in 200 years' time, the earth would be passing the debris field of what they call the Tauri meteor shower, which happens every November. In fact, we've just gone through it last week. And there is the chunks of a mini planet that broke up about 35,000 years ago. And sometimes the Earth is just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that was exactly what was going on. And you fast forward to the story and it says, well, we're going to have to manufacture and use the power of our will to make sure that these big chunks that are going to be near the Earth actually succeed in colliding with the Earth, and there'll be massive destruction. And there's this agonizing moment where they're saying there's nothing we could do unless we had not manufactured this destruction. Humans would not stand a chance, but we know that some people will survive and the god will also die, but the few that will be lucky enough to survive will be in charge of assisting hunter-gatherers to get themselves back on their feet. And bingo, now we're in history, because now we connect with the myths of every culture on the face of the earth. It says at this moment, when this flood subsided, groups of 7 gods with one charismatic leader arrived in specific locations, and humans miraculously discovered civilization. So technically, we owe the Anunnaki a modicum of gratitude for having this conversation right now, because otherwise we'd be populating a planet full of, well, actually, we wouldn't be here. It'll be a planet full of red-haired giants.
Yes, I think that a lot of credit, thank you first and foremost for that wisdom. I think a lot of credit should go to the Anunnakis. My personal opinion, of course, my take on it is that they were not as evil and psychopathic as everyone claims for them to be. I have been given a privilege at one time, opportunity to speak and communicate with a 6th density being from an Alpha Draconian empire. And this race particularly has expressed to me the story of the Anunnakis from their perspective, because they had access to, as they call it, a memory bank, to be able to tell me how many times Anunnakis came to Earth, what is the length of days they stayed each time. So in our time, our linear time, what is the purpose of the first visit and following visits? What did they do? Percentages of malevolence versus benevolence within all of these times. And my conclusion certainly is not that they just came here to be psychopaths and all of these propagandas and misinformation. No, they did not eat humans, blah, 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 and all these things. They certainly taught a lot of things. You know, there was obviously the genetic revision that occurred within all of us, but a lot of the times they taught us a lot of different things. And then after, they also included, as I would call it, a human race or humanoids that lived on Earth to do things with them. But they certainly weren't from Earth. They didn't just pop out of some cave. You know, they came here with their ships and so forth. And not to go on subject, off of subject, you mentioned something I want to ask you about. You talked about the Orion. I know one of your documentaries, you have 14 different documentaries. Tell me about that one.
Well, Orion really, the documentary was something that I was doing when I got caught in COVID, and with lots of time on my hands, and I had tons of stuff and data, footage, and I thought, well, I'm not going to sit around and feel sorry for myself. I'm going to get busy. And I had all this data from Orion, from stories all around the world that I collected, but it didn't fit any book format. So I figured, great, I'll make a 1 hour documentary, much easier. That'll be just perfect. And sure enough, there is a connection between every single ancient culture on the earth that I've ever looked at that talks about the same thing. And that is that once upon a time, the gods were associated with Orion. Now, you go to the Yucatan today, and you'll hear exactly the same story from the Maya. And that's one of the most complete stories that I've heard from anybody. And they said, to put it in a nutshell, that there's a time around 9600 BC, which is when their sacred book begins, when they were receiving people from the Atlantic Ocean who had lost their island nation. These were called the Its, and they lived in an island called Atoll. They were into big words back then. And from the three groups of people that arrived along the Yucatan and the Mexican coast, one was, of course, Quetzalcoatl, and he arrives with 7 sages, one of whom is his wife and his sister, which I'm sure is a symbol. Then you have Kukulkan, who arrives further down the coast, and then you have another one, which no one ever talks about, called Itzamna. And he's the most interesting of all of them, I believe, because, well, least of all, because no one ever talks about him. And there's a great memory of him in the Yucatan. And I was reading through their sacred text, and they're saying, well, originally they were coming from the half of the universe, which of course pricks my ears immediately. Where could the half of the universe possibly be? And they were very specific about it. And they said, well, in this very today, you can still see the half of the universe represented in the temples of the Yucatan. And if you go to the sacred space in the middle, you'll see the half of the temple, which is the center of the temple, and there are 3 stones, unless they've been removed by the priests or the Spanish conquistadors, and both of those are true. But in some places, like Uxmal, for example, they're still there. And they said these 3 stones represent the 3 belt stars of Orion. Okay, that's the place from where the gods used to come from a long, long time ago. And they can't specify the time because time for them is almost circular. You might as well say hundreds of thousands of years. We don't know. But at one point, they said that's where they originally came from. But the specific place is not the Orion's belt. That's like a way station. It's sort of like a junction. They said the actual half of the universe is formed by the 3 brightest stars of Orion, which forms a perfect equilateral triangle from our perspective. And at the center, you have what NASA knows as the M42 star cluster. So it's a nebula. And NASA, when I actually thought about this, I wonder if they've done any research into this, and sure enough, they had. And it's very recent. It's only because we have, nice big telescopes orbiting the Earth right now. And they said, and I quote, the fascinating thing about that we found with this particular telescope is the Orion constellation, specifically the M42. And I quote, it's the biggest star-forming region that we know of the solar system, if not the entire galaxy. And that really pricked my ears. So how did the Maya, first of all, know that this is a place where creation comes from, where everything is created? Because when you take that story to Japan and you look at those nice red torii arches that you have to cross with the red crossbar when you go into sacred space, they're iconic all the way through Japan. They have exactly the same story. That torii arch with the big crossbar, that represents the belt stars of Orion, and the 2 bars represent the lower section. And the place where you and I walk into a sacred space in Japan mirrors the exact position of M42. So they again have the same connection. And that's what I thought made it so interesting, that you could actually reference this in Polynesia. You can go to Sumeria, you can go to Armenia, you can go to any ancient culture in the world, including the Hopi, and they'll talk exactly the same thing, that it's a specific place in the sky where everything apparently originates.
Very well. Speaking of Japan, if you don't mind me asking you, is it true that the Knights of Templar did dig things, did build things in Japan, aside from just Egypt, aside from just India? Was it true that the church truly did create a genocide over them? They truly destroyed and killed them all?
They didn't kill them, they wiped out most of them, they burned them alive. Um, they didn't get to Japan. There's no evidence for that at all. Any of the stuff that they ever wrote or ever talked about. And believe me, I spent 15 years researching them before I wrote my book. So I think I almost got under the skin of the Templar. And even then, it wasn't enough. You have to go and look at their figurehead, who was burned with Clairvaux. I read all 500 of the surviving letters, and I really got under his skin. Once you're in that position, now you can really find out what you can see things from their eyes almost. What was going on is that they had been patiently waiting for 1,000 years through one mechanism or another to get to Jerusalem, because by their time, the area was controlled by the Seljuk Turks, who are not particularly nice people. I mean, there's Arab people, and then there's the Seljuk Turks, and they were pretty brutal. Before that, the Egyptians and any Arab people who were controlling Jerusalem gave permission for pilgrims and safe passage to pilgrims, particularly Christians, to visit Jerusalem without being hung or having their stomachs slit open. So there's this moment in time where this group of minor nobles in Europe found themselves in a unique situation of being able to go there, because there was one pope preaching a big crusade to go and kill all the infidels. Well, those are the Crusaders. They have nothing to do with the Templars. This group of people basically went on the back of the Crusaders, almost like hiding among the Crusaders, and found their way to the doorstep of the King of Jerusalem, who had just refurbished the Solomon stables at quite an extravagant amount of money. And they, I think there was 3 of them that showed up on his door and said, "Hi, you don't know us, or maybe you do. We just come all the way from Europe, and we'd like to live in the place that you just refurbished." And the king just said, "Absolutely, please go right in." Now, I don't think that being threatened by 3 people is going to force a king to give up his home. So obviously, he knew something was up. And they had a predetermined idea of what was in Solomon stables and what was around it, because there were cryptographers involved in all of this that were at the time living in the center of what will become France, the Kingdom of Champagne and Burgundy, which was a center of enlightenment in Europe at the era. This is a moment where Arabs and Jewish scholars are working together and sharing information. You know, what a concept. Everybody was looking for something much more than the church was giving. So this group of nobles were very intellectuals as well, and they gave up all their wealth to go and dig tunnels in hot and horrible conditions. And then, believe me, I've read the accounts. It was horrible. If you didn't die of dysentery, you'd die of plague, or then you'd have to go and walk through raw sewage to find money, a treasure. It doesn't make any sense. And the fact is that they were looking for something which was a treasure, but not in the way you and I would perceive it. So it was rumored that around the time when 1,000 years earlier, when the Essenes were evicted from Jerusalem, that they had left behind some instructions about self-development, out-of-body experiences, and other kinds of things that really connected you to a creator, a god, if you like. And this was part of what they call the treasure. There's a treasure of words, not a treasure of money. And so it's been going in the underground intellectual system in Europe for a long, long time. So the Templars, basically, we found out in the 19th century that they'd been digging a radial line of tunnels, homing in somewhere under Temple Mount. And they found what they're looking for, because within 3 years, they weren't doing any fighting. They were just basically holed up in this place in Jerusalem. In 3 years, something happened. They found something, and a group of them scurried back to Europe with a bunch of scrolls which required the deciphering by the cryptographer. And we know that basically a lot of the stuff that was written by Essenes was written in a special code that couldn't be understood by you and I. So that tracks very nicely. And after that, the Templars vanished. They disappeared into Europe, and then created my original country of birth, which is Portugal, where they'd already set up shop before that in order to hide whatever it was that they found in Jerusalem. So in Portugal, they had a home which is so far away from Rome that they could get on with the work. And after that, they liaised with the Templars in Scotland and started creating this utopian society throughout Europe. So that's what the church basically was after. What had they found that was making them loved by everybody? Because the church certainly wasn't practicing love thy neighbor at all. They were actually killing everybody's neighbors if they didn't agree with church philosophy. Well, it turns out years later, during a minor slip in the 19th century by one of the popes, when he got totally drunk, he said, "This fable of Christ has served us very well." Oh, so the church knew that the whole story of Jesus had been fabricated. I mean, there was a real guy, obviously, but the whole idea of the crucifixion, everything had been completely fabricated, which is why the Gnostic Christians and every other sect in the Near East at the time said, no, the Catholic Church is a perversion. It's a fake church. This is not what Christianity is all about. And they all got murdered, to make sure that no one could tell the story. Well, the Templars found themselves in the same situation because they'd found out what was so important about early Christianity and all the teachings of the period. And that is, there was a book called Giza, and it still survives to this very day. You'll find it with the Mandeans of southern Iraq, and they're a sect that venerate John the Baptist as the true Messiah, and they're absolutely right, because the two people that whose church that the Templars dedicated every church to in Europe was John the Baptist and Mary Magdalene, two very uncomfortable people for the church. So the Giza was the book of John the Baptist, which is essentially a Buddhist teaching, which everyone knew about in the Middle East and the Middle East, even in India. And when you translate the word Giza, it means treasure. So that's the treasure that the Templars found. It was a book about self-development and inner spirituality. So essentially the Templars were Buddhists trying to teach the ordinary people how to connect with God. You don't need an intermediary. And of course, the church did not like that at all, because the foundation of the church was based on complete lies, and they would be doing out of a job. The other part of the story, of course, is that Philip of France wanted to get rid of him because he wanted to join the Templar order, but he was bent as a $6 note. So they wouldn't let him in, and they owed him a lot of money as well. So of course he just got his own back by manufacturing all kinds of evidence against them, with the Pope saying, "Oh, they're worshipping this devil called Baphomet." Well, any kind of person knows that Abafohilame means the source of wisdom, and it related to the mummified head of John the Baptist, which was the only treasure that the Templars cared about. They said, "We'd rather die penniless than give up this treasure called the head of John the Baptist, because he's the source of wisdom. He is the tradition that we've been following, and that people for over 5,000 years before have been following too." So that made a lot more sense in terms of logistics from the way that I researched the story.
I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely. I know that you have a documentary called 900-Year-Old Secret of the Templars, and I haven't watched it. I certainly am going to watch it, and I will agree with you. The $6 bill, it's exactly what I think of the current pope or any of the popes. I'll tell you this: one of the phases in my life, about probably say 10 years ago, when I started to travel the world, and one of my family members owns a travel agency, so I was able to travel for significantly less and save money, obviously. But one of the places I went to was very interesting. It's a tiny little town in France, South France, called Avignon. And in the Avignon, you already, I can see, know about it. For the audience, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny little town. The most important thing is this wonderful castle, as I'll call it, where first several popes lived. And I was able to go inside and stay a little longer than an average person, just finding myself to be lost on purpose, just so I can absorb more information. And the level of genocide, the level of like serious psychopathic genocide and murder, including burning people, that the church did back in those days, it was mind blowing. And I say this to you, Freddie, because I was brought up in a family of Christians, Catholics. So when I presented some of this information, along with certain things that I noticed within the Vatican, and I've been to the Vatican 3 different times as a guest, of course, and many other places across Europe, I started to become very sickened by the entire deception.
Mm.
And as a Christian, if you'll call me that, I'm obviously no longer religious. I feel that I was completely lied to and deceived by the psychopaths who run that blood sacrificing place called Vatican. I mean, it's one of the worst places on earth. But
Why were the fundamentalist Christians persecuting the Gnostic Christians? That doesn't make any sense to me. And the more I inquired into it, and the more I also looked at the research, excellent research of Michael Bajan, who was a theologian researcher who co-wrote Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And to some degree, I kind of based my theories on his foundation because he'd done some meticulous research. I came to the same conclusion that everybody was saying, no, this is an imposter church. And once you start looking at the Gnostic Gospels and bring them into the equation, and also look at the other sects in the Near East at the time, they all agreed on the same thing, that true Christianity is not what became the Catholic Church. There's Gnostic Christianity, and then there's fundamentalism, and the two are night and day. That's why I never confuse Christians with Catholics. It's like, I don't want to insult Christians because they might be following the right thing. But today, the two are so convoluted that no one really knows where anything begins. But if you go back to the origin, which people should, I mean, if you're going to follow a religion, you might as well do it for the right reasons, not for what you've been taught. And I'd say that the early Christianity has much more in common with Zen and Buddhism than anything else. In fact, they're almost inseparable. The teachings of Jesus are actually quite inseparable from early Buddhism. And it's actually quite a beautiful story. So that's where I would go and do the research. Look at the early books of Thomas and people like that, and you'll see that they were absolutely mad. And I remember reading the Gospel of the Great Seth, which is one of the texts that was found in Mount Hammadi. Unfortunately, not much of it left. And there's a wonderful line, a whole paragraph there. And it's a conversation between Jesus and Peter in a crowd watching Jesus's alleged crucifixion. I thought, no wonder this stuff got banned. So Jesus allegedly is looking at himself being crucified, and he says to Peter, you know, they all think it's me being crucified, but it's someone else called Simon, and I'm laughing at their ignorance. And I thought, oh, what a lovely moment in time. So yeah, you've got to look at the other side of the coin, and then look at the, you take yourself out of the equation and look at the evidence and see something here doesn't add up. It really doesn't add up. And then you likely to reach something closer to the truth.
I think a lot of things don't add up do not add up when it comes to church. I was brought up in an Orthodox and Roman Catholic environment as a young child. I know that still certain family members, I would say, practice that beautifully and wonderfully, just like a lot of people around the world, of course.
Yeah.
And then growing up, I was brought into almost an environment where we lived, where there was a lot of Islam and a lot of those wonderful people who practice that beautifully. But, even in Islam, in Quran, it specifically says that Jesus was never crucified. I know during my tours of going through Saudi Arabia countries, including Church of St. Anthony in Istanbul, Turkey, I remember speaking to a person there off the record, speaking to people in Cairo after paying them to take me to certain places. I know they said, listen, there's a reason why a lot of Jewish people do not believe that he was crucified. But and I'm not telling you this, but I'm just giving you my perspective and my opinion. But if you look at all of the mistranslations in the Bible, I mean, there are colossal amount of mistranslations. I mean, the Christians today should certainly ask their priest, did Jesus walk on water, or was there a reflection of the sun that walked on water? And the mistranslation, what's Christmas stand for? Is that his birth, or is that Saturnia or Saturnalia? And we know what happened in those 14 days around the time of Rome or whatever. Yeah, the Rome, I believe it was Easter. Is that his birthday or not? I mean, there's tremendous amount of misinformation in the Christian practicing Christianity, whatever, particularly Roman Catholic. I think you'd have to torture me to go back to that. And I still say no and say, go ahead and behead me. I wouldn't do it. It is the largest controlled prison system that now, as a spiritual person, that's kind of a little more than just spirituality. I mean, I don't meditate with incense and wear a Buddha t-shirt at home. I'm not that kind of guy. I'm a little more deeper guy, but everything I know, I would strongly advise everyone to get out of that cult. Spend your money wisely, buy memories and not stupid things in life, and buy books, buy videos, travel, research, touch things, and ask, hey, listen, is our history what we're told in school, on the internet, by the church?
It was such a pleasure to write the Lost Art of Resurrection because it asks all those questions. And you're quite right, the translation errors were ridiculous.
Oh, it's this book right here then.
There we go. The virgin birth. Take the virgin birth. Get this. You have to understand Latin. There's early Latin and there's later Latin. There's two versions of the same language, and a lot of the words have changed. So Virgo, okay, what we today would say virgin, actually not quite true in the original version of Latin, because Virgo originally meant a young woman of marriageable age. She doesn't have to be a virgin. There's a problem right there, you see. And then it goes on, the problem just escalates. But you're right. Also, if you read the Quran, which actually holds Jesus to the highest level of prophethood, along with Muhammad, and that's saying something. for people that we tend to vilify so much. Well, if Muhammad is so holy, well, they put Jesus right on the same pedestal. Well, so why are we fighting? What are we fighting about? And right in the Quran, they said, no, they did not crucify the Messiah, Isa, which, by the way, is ISIS. So for them, Jesus and ISIS are one individual, same title, a girly man. And they said, no, they crucified someone else. They crucified someone who had been a thief, because that was what we did with crucifixion. You crucified thieves and people who had broken Roman law. Jesus had never broken the Roman law, and they actually put that very much into context. So again, it's good to go back and see the origins of where these things came from, because there's a lot of beauty to it. I mean, there's a lot of priests going around the world who do so many good things for humanity. I mean, Mother Teresa, for God's sake, I couldn't do what she did. And she was a Catholic, I believe. There are a lot of people that I knew when I was growing up. Some of them were complete bastards, and some of them were actually really useful people to know. They were very humanistic. They were very helpful. So again, you can't really always throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's always,
No, of course.
it's really important never to sort of pillory everybody, because there's good in everybody and there's bad in everybody. But well, that's the fun of being here on Earth, isn't it?
It is. It's fun to really live off this reality, this theater we live in, this realm that we're in, absolutely. And there's got to be duality. As a channeler, I always teach individuals, do not just follow, what's safe, what's love, light. No. It's okay to experience other things. It's just how you grow. It's how you evolve. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think the first step with all the Christians, they should research, first of all, what was Joshua ben Joseph? What's that name? Because Christ was not his official last name, and so forth. And so many stolen concepts from previous civilizations, previous stories, just taken, rebranded, renamed, repainted, and labeled as their own. And they're
Yeah.
excellent at that, I think.
And in fact, Mithra was one of the earliest versions of the story. There's one in Mongolia. The Navajo also have a Gesu, who also starts his peregrination on the spring equinox, and 9 months later he has a metaphoric death into the underworld, rises from the dead 3 days later. This is a very old symbol, but it was done by real people, and a lot of these names are not even names, they're titles, which of course it makes it very confusing. There were a lot of Mithras going around. There was a lot of Osiris going around, a lot of Quetzalcoatl's going around. It drives the historians absolutely crazy, because they're not real names, they're just titles. So anybody can become an Osiris if they follow that sort of particular tradition. But you're right. If you just look at the basic story of Mithra from the Indus Valley in 6,600 BC, which is the earliest known mention of the guy, the god man, you can just strip away the word Mithras and then insert the word Yeshua ben Yosef, and boom, you've got the story of Jesus right there. Except that the dates are the wrong way around in the Catholic version, which is, again, shows you
The dates are always wrong.
Understanding of the true mystery, which is what apostles like Thomas was saying. No, they profess that they know the mystery, but they know nothing, and they're literally bullshit artists, which is what he was saying in so many words. And he calls them waterless canals. I thought, what a lovely phrase. They're just a bunch of waterless canals. So yeah, it's a great story, but like I said, if you're going to follow somebody or follow something, at least be sure that you know what it is that you're following, and then no one can tell you otherwise.
Of all the crop circles you've researched, what would you say would be one to you that's the most fascinating one?
Oh, that's a hard question.
Centipede one, maybe?
And in fact, the beings who are no longer in physical form, who are behind the original crop circles, call themselves the Watchers. So technically, the Anu are still around; they're just not in the same physical format. So that's another story. But I've experienced a lot of them, and I've had my own particular experience. I've been levitated in one. I didn't realize that was even possible, and that's what got me to write the first book, which then becomes an international bestseller. And it's kind of become the Bible in a good way of the phenomenon. Or at least I'm being reminded of that all the time by people. So that's good. I probably want to say there's two of them, if I may. One of them, because by 1999, we were getting pretty good at figuring out where they're going to appear. And it's all about being a person of the serpent. It's about tuning into the environment and developing your own natural psychic ability. Anybody can do this, really. What you have to do is let go of your mental state and just look at what's going on in the world around you, become much more attuned to nature. And I realized that this was also happening to me as I'm learning my ropes. And I began to an exercise at the beginning of the season in 1999 to see, can I actually predict where the crop circles are going to appear? And I would make a prediction about a week ahead, plot them on a map, and sure enough, bing, they would appear. And then you have to go and do the research. You have to go there, you have to do the analysis, the scientific analysis of the soil, the plants, and yeah, it'll be the real thing. And of course, there'll be man-made stuff going on as well. And then I thought, can I do it with dowsing? Because I was learning to become a dowser, and I could do the same thing as well. And then, as the season's progressing, and I'm getting quite confident of this, I thought, what if I undertake an experiment, a blind experiment, where I ask 6 or 8 people from different points of life? So I have psychics, I have editors, I have electrical engineers, computer experts. I'm going to ask them in 2 different continents, actually 3 different continents. I want you to give me, we're in May now, I want you to tell me when you think the main one, the big one of the season's finale is going to appear. I want you to give me an idea of what it may look like and where it's going to be. And that's all I said. None of them knew they were part of this experiment. So they all sent me their information. I kept everything in envelopes or in private emails, so no one knows anything. And I had already made my own prediction. And I put that also aside. And sure enough, every single person not only named one specific field and one specific town in the whole of the British Isles, which is extraordinary, but also the fact that it would have a certain 7-fold geometry with a hint of a 9-pointed geometry. And we're all very kind of fuzzy about this, which made a lot of sense afterwards, by the way. And then the timing was the most difficult one, because time on Earth is not the same as time anywhere else in the universe. Okay, we have a linear time. The universe works on some other principle. And we got it to within 48 hours, 72 at the most, which is not actually too bad. So I actually went to the field in question with a friend of mine who's an extraordinary gifted psychic, and we're looking over the field on the hill, looking down at the projected area where this thing was going to be. It was like watching this liquid air rotating above the field as if the crop circle was already forming. It's already in its embryonic stage, and we thought, great, we're going to stake this out. And we just tuned in, and we thought, I think it's going to be happening tomorrow morning. Okay, so I called up my pilot, and I said, listen, Graham, I want to book the microlight for first thing tomorrow morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not going to tell you where we're going. It's a secret project. Okay. And he says, well, if you're looking for crop circles happening, I'm probably going to be the last person flying the fields today. I haven't seen anything, and people will have to make it overnight. And that's got to be a pretty fast rate of creation, because at that time of the year, there's only about 4 hours of real darkness in the south of England. I said, I can't tell you anything. Anyway, I got on the microlight at 7:30 in the morning. We flew there. There's fog over the predicted field. It circled around, and on the 4th circling, the fog lifted, and there it was, 7-pointed geometry. And later we discovered there's a 9-fold element in the center that's hidden, and everybody nailed it absolutely. I thought that was pretty good. But the other more important one went back to the fact that originally a lot of the information came through a psychic. No one knew what a crop circle was back in the 1970s. It was a very rare phenomenon, as we found out later. It had been going on for over 100 years, and you have to really dig around the news in newspapers to find out what people were looking at back in the 1860s, and it's all there. It's not as rare as we think it is. But it came to fruition in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. That's when the big time of crop circles really was. And during one of the transcribed sessions of this trance medium, I learned that the watchers were saying there's a few reasons why we're laying down these symbols across the face of the earth. And one of them is to do with getting humans to evolve beyond fossil fuels. And I can't remember what the exact word they used for fossil fuels. It was almost like your technology that's holding you back, that's polluting your planet. It was that kind of vernacular. And they said, we've actually imprinted the details of technology within some designs, and specifically a machine that defies the illusion of gravity. Those are the exact words. And I knew exactly which one they were talking about. It's one of the most famous crop circles, and a lot of people have tried to decipher it. Some really well, and some a little bit off center. And I fought for the picture of that particular crop circle to be on the front cover of the book, and I nearly lost the book deal because of that. The publishers didn't want it. I said, I will give away 5 years of work and my marriage that failed, that ended in divorce. I lost my house, my cats, my cars, my money for this one moment where this book that I never wanted to write and almost got pushed into it by what I call the management. I'm going to stick all these years and all the pain that I've suffered to have that picture on the book. If it's not on the front cover, I'm bailing out. There's no contract. And for 3 days, there was a Mexican standoff. And I'm thinking, maybe my ego got a little bit too much ahead of me. What have I done? And 3 days later, I said, okay, we'll let it go this time. If we can crop it here and there, said, well, don't crop it too much. Because I knew that that was the one symbol that would go, the idea that would go into people's heads in the scientific community. And guess what? I learned 10 years later through various communications that there's a group in London of scientists, a group in Oklahoma, and one in Australia that have built that design in 3D, and I quote, it defies gravity.
I've always seen them as magnificent, elegant, sophisticated, pretty, marvelous, almost blueprints, for patterns that we've never heard of, whether it's molecule structure for new form of energy, whether it's new math. I mean, look at that one crop circle that gave us math that not even the 13 books of Euclid's math has today.
I know.
Tremendous amount of information. And I think anyone, and I mean this with respect, that truly thinks all of these magnificent, massive, long crop circle patterns, not circles, but patterns that are happening or being created by two drunk guys at a bar with some wooden boards. I think these people have consciousness equivalent of a squirrel. So my question is, if you were in an elevator, Freddie, and it's a funny question, but be honest, if you were in an elevator and you wearing a t-shirt with a crop circle on it, or your front cover of your book, and a random person looks at you and says, oh, yeah, a couple of guys from London, England, they made those. Did you know that? What is the first answer you say to that person? And be honest.
Oh, it's very simple. You just say, yeah, it is amazing what they could do. For example, let me give you an opinion here. How did they actually flatten the crop where the actual plants, which are very delicate, as you know, they're bent 2 inches above the soil and they're creased, and as though they've been made molten like glass, rehardened at 90 degrees, and the rest of the plant is actually hovering above the soil. That's incredible. It's almost like they were able to defy gravity. And then there's the molecular structure to the actual plant's DNA, which has been shown in a laboratory to be completely different to the plants that you and I eat for breakfast in cornflakes. And then, by which time the person is trying to get out of the elevator, there's a change to the soil structure, the chemical composition, which we've shown in laboratories again and again that's there. How are they able to do that? But my all-time favorite is when they claim to have made a specific crop circle in this particular field in England, and then another crop circle appears in France in the same evening, another one in Ohio in the same evening. Now, how did they were able to relocate in 3 different places at the same time? Because if they could do that, I want to actually study them, because I would like to bilocate. Because think of how much money I would save on airfare and jet lag by being in 3 different places at the same time. Can you explain that to me? And you just put that into their field, into their tennis court, and you see the blood draining from the face. You go, actually, that doesn't make any sense. No, that's why I wrote a book.
Right. And then the person probably will give you a very primitive answer. And then if I was standing beside you, Freddie, I would say, sir, did you also know that within these crop circles, the crops are actually never broken? Did you know that they're just bent? Perfect angle. And at that pocket, at that elbow, just like if you looked at a 90-degree PVC elbow or EM2 elbow materials electricians use, you'll be able to see they're never broken, that they're just bent. Did you know that the roots go sideways? They're no longer going downwards. Did you know that there's been in these patterns designs for advanced mechanical routers, magnetic fields, fusion reactions, warning to humans in relation to catastrophes? What about aviation industry inventions? Did you know any of that? But yes, of course, no, definitely. You are right. 2 guys went after a bar with a couple of skateboards, and then they made these just for shits and giggles. And you're absolutely right, sir. You're absolutely right. They happen to be 1.4 kilometers long, and they did this throughout the night before that 6 a.m. sunset. You got it.
So that's where the penny dropped. Now, this has all been made up. They've been set up. And turns out, it's kind of long story short, they had been paid to do so by the Ministry of Defense in England to bring the whole crop circle religion under control. And this was brought up in British Parliament. And eventually we found out that the press agency that had given their story to the Daily Mirror, which is not exactly the high point of intellectual discourse in Britain, It was a fictitious press agency staffed by members of the British Secret Service, which had previously been used to send out this information on the Northern Ireland conflict. That's where the penny really dropped. And then we spoke to the farmers when Doug and Dave were told to, let's go and see what you can do then in front of the world's press. So they made this piece of absolute garbage. And I looked at the farmers and they looked at me and said, you know, that's not what we get. That's rubbish. That's exactly nothing like what we get. The plants or the stuff what we get is totally undamaged. And if we leave them alone, the plants come back up. And then when we plow the field and reseed it, the plants in where the crop circle used to be are growing twice as fast as the rest of the field. There's a fertilizing quality in that area. And that's when we went, my God, it's to do with the heat and the sound that we've been recording. And bingo, we were proved that right as well. So the farmers became our best friends all of a sudden. And then they come out and they tell you the stuff that they've been seeing about what's behind the crop circles. And you go, oh, but they don't want to be, ridiculed in the pubs. So they kept their names, quiet. But
suppress that information. Suppress, and suppress some more. And not to mention, most genuine crop circles exist with a corresponding geometric image created by the sound frequency. I mean, I followed Greg Braden's work. He certainly speaks about crop circles as well as you do, and he's demonstrated as well that there's been secrets to our DNA within them. I mean, look at that. I believe the site is called Stonehenge in UK. We've had a site there, which is a two-dimensional insect and the centipede, and it contained like mathematical patterns called Julia set, as you know, that such complex advanced math. How would they even know about that? I mean, I discuss crop circles these days, and as you and I just shooting the shit, we're talking and laughing, but like some people actually think that they are man-made. I swear to you, Freddie, here in Canada, some people think that crop circle patterns, even when you take the two-dimensional aspect into a three-dimensional aspect to see the full capacity of this pattern, full integrity, the complex pattern, they'll say, no. It's just a coincidence. But
and by the way, the Stonehenge formation, me and my colleagues, there's 8 of us, took us 6 hours to survey that formation. And apparently 2 guys did it in 4 hours of complete darkness. But I'll tell you one thing that no one talks about. We found an eyewitness. If you notice Stonehenge, see Stonehenge is up here. It's on slightly elevated ground, so you can actually see the field where the crop circle is from there. If you're not looking at the stones, if you turn around, there's a field right there. And separating the two is a very busy road in Britain. It connects the London to the southwest. So it's one lane that way, one lane that way, of course. And it's always full of traffic. Nobody saw a thing in bright daylight because that thing appeared within 15 minutes of the guards going around Stonehenge to check to make sure that no one was jumping the fence and that the Queen was getting her 5 shillings and 6pence to view the stones. And they looked around. 15 minutes later, it's there in bright daylight. It just appeared out of nowhere. Well, it turns out there was one witness because he was the one that created the traffic jam that built up within seconds of that thing appearing. And it was a taxi driver. And we contacted him afterwards, and he said, I didn't want to come forward. I didn't want to be ridiculed, but that's usually a good start. He said, this tube of light came out of the sky like a cookie cutter. It went around for about 15 seconds, and it just appeared. The whole the field just flattened. And I said, you'd have been in a perfect position. He slammed on his brakes. He got on the bonnet of his car to take a better look at it, and he was the one that created the traffic jam. So he wasn't making it up. And we do know, we hadn't published the information at that time, that we had over 80 eyewitnesses going back to 1870 around the world that had seen the crop circles appearing with a tube in less than 15 seconds, regardless of the shape and size. So he was not making this up. He would not have known. I hadn't published the information yet.
Right. You're absolutely. They go back a very long time. Yes, I certainly agree. Not just in Henstone, not just in England, but you go from canola oil farmers, banana farmers. They really go everywhere. I've had a privilege once, a very unhonorable privilege to speak to a being, fourth density being, and on Earthbound and a Zeta Reticuli type of origin. And he stated that within our human linear time, between 3 to 5 seconds of our time, the entire pattern is made because it's calculated, pre-programmed, planned out way, way, way before it even occurs. And it's done in a immaculate precision, sharp precision way that there is absolutely no mistakes. I'll share this with you too. I respect you enough to share this with you because I know you have a very open mind, Freddie. Another being I've connected to who is not of Zeta Reticuli nature said that sometimes what ends up happening in very small cases when it comes to crop circle patterns is that patterns are created purposely to mislead the human race. And
Okay.
certain things are changed within that pattern purposely to mislead the human race. So I've posed the question. I said, well, how is that corrected? Is it corrected? Is it just left there? And they said, yeah, it's quite corrected because of the interventions that occur. The interventions that occur by obviously interdimensional technology and crafts, they'll be able to change one thing about that crop in order to correct that malevolent mistake. And I found that to be fascinating. Obviously, that there's obviously again duality. We have malevolence, we have benevolence, and then everything else in between. But I just wanted to share that with you from a personal story, not that I read it somewhere. This is a personal story, and I'm forwarding it to you.
It's pretty consistent with what we found because there were anomalies. Again, you can't paint the whole thing with the same brushstroke. There are a lot of man-made designs as well, and they're working in gangs of up to 14 people. So in the last 10 years, most of them have been fake. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, most of the crop circles in the last decade have all been fake. We were told that the crop circle phenomenon, we're coming to a close. They're given the information, we have to act on it. And I've actually caught groups of 14 people making some pretty elaborate things, but you can't fake the details on the ground. It's terrible. You can tell the difference between one and the next. But there were some cases where there were some patterns which weren't either genuine, but they also weren't fake. And I remember walking with the editor of Nexus magazine. We were just throwing ideas around the field. I thought, what could it be? And I said, well, look at the way that the plants have all stunted, like they've been affected by microwave. And I thought, that's funny. And there's a way of detecting sound frequency relative to microwave. And one of them creates growth, and the other one stunts growth. Microwave is not very nice. And next year, I came back to look at the same spot, everything's dead. I thought, that's microwave acting on the plants. It's completely stunted and inhibited the growth. And people were we began to postulate, and we couldn't prove this, that is it possible that some designs are made by people who are paid for by the British government, and said, yes, we know who they are because we even know where they live in London. We got their address. They were recruited by by MI5 when they were still at art college, which makes a lot of sense. And would it be possible that then they would make a crop circle so it looks like a man-made thing, but then it has the illusion that there's energy in there? But then the energy is created by an orbiting satellite that could basically throw microwave and irradiate the entire area. So absolutely, we have that technology. And you can also show that by using either very expensive electrical equipment, or you can go there with a pair of good dowsing rods, if you're a good dowser, and show that any spread of microwave is not consistent with the shape of the design. It goes outside the design, it goes in the design. And it's very fleeting. Within a couple of hours, it dissipates, it's gone. And sure enough, the energy theory disappeared within 2 hours of it being found. So there are all these other pockets within the crop circle phenomenon, which there's a lot of strange interactions and intervention going on.
Certainly.
We can only speculate at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think in a conclusion, when it comes to crop circles, because I just have one question left for you, but I'm going to ask you in a second. Anyone that certainly doubts the existence of authentic crop circles and the creators of authentic crop circles, I think aside from the centipede crop circle, which we just talked about, another one would be, I think, in my opinion, second most prettiest one, which would be where the two keys, old keys appearing crop circle that appeared like as a key, and there were two of them, and what it had inside was speed of light calculations. Second, that would be second. My third favorite, probably, or most complex one, would be the geometry one, the Ptolemy's theorem of chords, and we know who he was, the Greek astronomer and so forth from Egypt in the 2nd century. I mean, that one hid in so many different things that I had to watch it 2 or 3 times when Greg Braden was talking about it. You did a presentation this too at Contact in the Desert, I believe, in Indian Wells, California, at the Renaissance Hotel. But crop circles, certainly, in my opinion, are absolutely authentic. There's some fake ones, there's some man-made ones, the complex ones. No, not an army of humans, not 2, not 3, no, not a brigade and an army of humans can create. But we'll leave that there. Thank you for your work, your wisdom, and your education that you have concluded, that you have equipped yourself with, and now you're forwarding it here on my show. I do have one more question. I've studied this for a while too, the Eastern Islands. In your opinion, short form, who are the heads depicting on Eastern Island, and also who placed the heads there before their departure? What's your take on that, Freddie?
Ah, I remember having this conversation with Robert Shark not too long ago, because obviously he's a much better geologist than I. And I said, Robert, it occurs to me when we finally found that the heads have a big body, they're up to 39 feet long, that there's no way that in 800 years there's that level of of sediment could have buried the heads. And he said, absolutely right. We're looking at sediment which is thousands of years old. The thing is, how do you prove it? Well, I was in communication with Joanne Van, and I'm going to kill myself now because I've forgotten her full name. She is the leading archaeologist at the site, and she takes it upon herself to do a lot of digs during the summer. And we've been in contact, and I said to her, I heard that you got to the actual bottom of the statues, one of them. Have you been able to get a prod under there and get an organic sample? Because that would qualify once and for all when the statues were at least placed there, if not when they were carved. And she goes, yeah, we've got some carbon-14 tests. I said, great. So when's it coming out? It should be coming out in the next few months. So great. I'll hold out the publication of the missing lands and put your report in there, because it'd be wonderful validation, no matter what the actual result is for all of us. Okay, so while time went by, I contacted her and said, so what happened to the peer-reviewed carbon-14 results? Oh, we're going to basically hold back the publication for a little while. Okay. 5 years later, 6 years later, and now she won't even respond to my emails. She responded to one of them before she stopped communicating. And I said, would I be sticking my head out a little bit too far to say they're over 11,000 years old? And the response was, and I don't think I'm overstepping the boundaries of privacy here, and she said that, well, the results that will eventually be published will be consistent with the current archaeological view, which is essentially her very diplomatic way of saying it's a whitewash. So, and I agree with Robert on this as well. So, fast forward to chapter 3, I believe, of the Missing Lands. I was in New Zealand talking to the original people from the Easter Island who now moved to New Zealand. And they've been there for a long, long time. And originally, when they were in Easter Island, they maintained their oral tradition. And it was only published in the last, 15 years. And I republished experts from their oral tradition in the Missing Lands. And they said quite categorically that back in the day when we lived on the Easter Islands, when it was an archipelago, which immediately dates the whole thing to before the Younger Dryads, there was a time when the gods used to show up. And they were much taller, they were lighter skinned, and they were lovely people, and they used to hang out with us. And they were caught in the Great Flood. And a few of them survived. They eventually made it to the birthplace of the gods. And then when we ended up going to New Zealand, we set up shop there, and we got homesick for Easter Islands. So we go back to Easter Islands. And several generations later, one of our kin went there, and we were really homesick, and we also really wanted to look at the faces of the Moai, or the Mokai as they call them. And I thought, well, that's an incredible admission. You haven't actually described the construction of the Moai. You've established the Moai as an actual fact just after the flood, and they're already an established presence on the island. So how old could they possibly be? So I persevered a bit more with the traditions, and the grandmothers also talked about this. And they said that the Moai were the real Moai, which are the ones made of basalt, not the newer ones, which are made of volcanic scoria, and they're actually quite porous, and the definition is not half as good. They said that the original Moai were the original images of the gods themselves, and the gods also had beards, which is very unusual in that part of the world, because men genetically, also in South America, cannot have beards. And that was a trait. If you had a beard, you were obviously connected with the gods. And if you look very carefully at the Moai with the made of basalt, they do have a very nice little goatee and a beard. And it goes all the way around the chin. Now, here's where Jacques Cousteau comes into the story. Because when he was diving off Easter Island, he noted that at 90 feet below sea level, there's a quarry there, and it's the only basalt quarry relative to the Easter Island that we see today. Now, all you have to do is do a little bit of mathematics. When was that quarry above water for the last time? It was over 12,000 years ago. So the memory, the folk memory of the White Heart on Easter Island ties in with the global catastrophe, the Younger Dryas, with Cousteau's discovery, and also with the theory of Robert and myself that the Moai have been there for very, very long. So the newer Moai, which are the ones that are made of the much more imprecise volcanic scoria, they are the heads of the chiefs that were ruling Easter Island way after that. So there's a story.
After you leave this earth one day, my friend, and I hope you live a very long time, but after your checkpoint comes, your exit point comes, my question to you is, clearly and obviously, even birds in the sky know the amount of information that's out there put out by you. Wonderful research. Some may agree, some may not agree. The point is, you've done this genuinely with beauty and grace. What do you wish to be remembered by, Freddie?
I have no idea. Actually, I don't really care. It's not really about me. I mean, I'm here to have a personal journey like all of us. I've come here to cure my demons, try to improve myself as an individual. Sometimes I make a mess of it, and I improve on that as we go along. But the reason why you're here and you incarnate is because you're not perfect. You come here to do better. But if I can leave the planet and people 1% better than when I found it, I think I've done a good job. And from a lot of the goodwill that I get from people, whether it's on social media or people that email me, I think I've made a good effort for that, to try and show what really was going on with our predecessors. I just wanted for people us to know, including myself, who were our predecessors? Why were they so good at doing things? And why is it today we can't even build a chair that has to have a matchstick under it to make sure it doesn't wobble? Clearly, there was another parallel civilization going, and if I've been able to at least to show who these people were, then that would be one thing to be, remembered for. The other thing is just that I've left a place in a better way, a state that I found it, and that brings me a lot of peace. I can't say any fairer than that, because in the end, it's I don't know. You can't. Anything that you leave behind is not really important. It's about how you become as a soul, and where you go to next time to improve yourself, and hopefully you leave in the better way than when you arrived. I will miss the 16-year-old Scotch, though. I hear that they don't have that in the other world. Taste is not the same without a physical body, so I will miss certain things.
It's so funny you said that. Thank you, first of all, for explaining that. The closest counterpart, closest connection I have that's off planet would be Theta Tauri rays. And I've asked them one question in the stages of getting to know them. And I said, what do you guys eat? What do you drink? How do you sustain large bodies, 400, 500 pounds? You have two hearts. How do you do that? What do you have in that world that would be able to be compared to our world as tea, coffee, alcohol, fruits, things of that sort? And they say, well, we don't eat anything. We're breatharians. It was, but we heard of the stories of earth humans such as yourself and your kind, of having this liquid in different colors you call alcohol, and how that makes you feel, and these things you call water, and things you mix with water. And you just triggered, when you were explaining that, it triggered that conversation, that how do you think of our food? And you're right on that side, regardless of the species, in my opinion, there's not a lot of fun things that we have here that we would consider to be fun, but yours is a 14-year-old Scotch. I guess you just gave me an idea what to get you for Christmas or your birthday if I see you at the next conference.
Yeah, below 16 is not worth drinking, in my opinion. I've already done that.
Let me write that down. Before 6. Okay, got it. Written it down, Freddie.
Oh, there is a 21-year-old Glenfarclas, which you never share with people if they ask for ice cubes or water. That is the closest I've seen to spiritual spirits. I mean, it's the most unbelievable, subtle essence of brewing. But actually, it's funny you touched on that, because a lot of these stories of the gods, they said they were vegetarians. Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, they were vegetarians, plant eaters. It's funny you should say that.
It's very interesting for me. I have devoted past several years to be a channeler, but prior to that, I've devoted more years to become one, to even learn how to do one effectively, efficiently, and very, very properly by integrating all the soul layers and different things. And I honestly had this almost prejudice against a lot of races that I've read about, that I've heard about, that I just said, oh, yeah, absolutely. They drink blood, they eat this and they eat that. And I remember I asked a race named KALASK, sixth density alpha draconian race, war race. And I said, what do you guys eat? And I knew they're going to say this. And they said, nothing, air. I'm like, that's impossible. How can you sustain a 500-600 pound body? And they said, well, because you guys have conditioning, you guys have programming, you guys are always told something. You're told this, you're told that from sources that have never done any research, that have never had any contact, that have not developed telepathy, that have not gone out of body, that have not gone on ships, that have not integrated their soul layers. So third, fourth, fifth, sixth density soul layers. So at that time, I learned a valuable lesson about, value and diversity. Do you judge or do you find out for yourself? So I said to myself, you know what? Instead of buying things, I'm very fortunate enough to be in business for a long time and own businesses that kind of operate themselves, So I said, I'm going to start buying memories. I'm going to start traveling the world and visiting sites that the ancients built so that I can feel it, touch it, and meditate on these sites, practice things and see what these sites are about and see the star language myself, see the priestesses and so forth that come out of these walls, whether it's limestone, whether it's granite, it doesn't matter. And this is what I really dedicated my true life to be perfectly honest with you. It's just channeling. It became an obsession for me. It became a lifestyle for me. And I excluded all of the other, I call them temptations in life, in order to just concentrate on that. And just like you, and I know we're speaking from two different angles, Freddie, just like you, my one main goal was truth. I just want the truth. And I know there's different versions on Earth when it comes to truth. If I asked you, how did the Atlantis fall? You'll give me a perspective based on your firm belief. But then if I ask 10 other people, they all have perspectives. They all got perspective. Everybody's got a perspective. But my goal always was to speak with brilliant minds in the industry, hence the purpose of this podcast. So thank you for being on the show. And also to research myself and compare what I found compared to what they found and learn from them, take the information that's valuable, that's authentic, utilize it, apply it, forward it to other generations, to other individuals. So I guess what I'm trying to say is several things at the same time. For one, I'm speaking, but for two, I'm thanking you in a way for, as a younger person, that I've learned from your own material, whether it's your books, whether it is your documentaries, whether it is your presentations. It is individuals like yourself that I look at and say, well, I necessarily don't want to become like one of them. I'm not a groupie. I have my own business and I have my own agendas, but the work that's put forward by, let's say, Robert Chodge, Eric Von Daniken, and all these different individuals, Graham Hancock, we talked about him earlier, or Billy Carson, we talked about him earlier, or yourself. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. It is incredible. It's colossal. It's overstimulating. It can be for someone. And I don't think that we have enough time in our short incarnation to read all the books there. I mean, I don't have a lot of books, maybe 800-900, and I've not read maybe 60% of them because I don't have the time. I don't have the time. And I wish I had the time. I wish we had 40-hour days, because I'd be probably calling you up once a month, once a week, say, hey, Freddie, let me ask you a question. For chapter 14 on your book, Divine Blueprint, what did his happen? What happened in Australia? You know what I mean? Because I'm that kind of guy. I'm not shy to ask for advice. Oh, no, 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 no. People email me with the craziest questions. I answer them. So I love learning more. I'm a sponge for information. I prefer deeper information. And you've given me a lot of that today, and for my audience, who I consider as family, I mean, we all appreciate that. I really don't have any further questions for you. I think we've had a conversation versus an interview. I really dislike that word interview, and I certainly am not in a position to be in interviewing you. I think we're having a great discussion, and I appreciate you coming on the show. And I'm very glad that you came to Canadian Awareness Podcast, the new podcast I created in November 2022. I certainly appreciate that. Any lasting words, Freddie, aside from your wonderful website, invisibletemple.com? I know you have another site called Freddie. I believe that's your photography website, but freddysilva.com. And you're on Facebook under Freddie Silva. Any other parting words with the audience here in Canada in relation to whatever you wish to say? I'll leave it up to you, Freddie.
Is everybody in Canada nice?
Not so much. It's more of a
Canada.
false. I'm not sure. The energy has changed.
I
The
always have a good
energy.
time with Canadians, it's wonderful. But no, joking aside, I mean, I'm serious. We're all just trying to sort of strive for the truth and bring things forward and make things happen. But again, you're right. We don't know what the truth is. And I do agree that the best thing you can do, the best gift you can give yourself, is to visit the sacred spaces. The fringe benefits are incredible. That's why I do this. It's not for the money. It's not for the prestige, the glory. It's about the interaction with things that are so remote and so distant in our past, but they've left a fingerprint of themselves. And if you go there, and I only learned this through, not because of books or because someone told me, but because of direct interaction over the years. But if you go there with a good heart and you ask the right questions at the right locations and don't expect an answer, things will come to you. I remember being at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, which is one of the highest elevation temples in the world. Not much left of it. It's also over 17,000 years old, according to the alignments of the stones. And I tell you, the age is incredible. And there's a lot of information that I've written about this, and but a lot of it comes from perception as well, where I just say, "What's this all about?" And I just go walking at the place, and the visuals, the dreams, the notes that I suddenly get in my head, I just start writing things down. And then I go and research it. I go to the library, I look up academic texts, and that's where the hard work comes in. And it's all there. I can't tell you how many times I've led to certain theories and conclusions based on an initial image that's been shown to me at these places. So that's why I treat them very respectfully. They're like my extended family, and they never let me down. But I never take them for granted either. So when I go there, honest of heart and say, what is this about? And just let it go, walk about. By the end of your walk, you've got notes, you go and research it, and it's all there. The information actually is all there. And that's why I implore people to go and hang out with them. Remember what the reason was that it took you there, because that's the most important thing. These places are living. They're not just rocks, they're living organisms in their own right. And you're a living organism. If you go there with your right intent, they'll know that. And so if you ever get this sense that you're not being welcome at a specific place, or suddenly your airfare's cancelled at the last second, when you're supposed to go to Egypt, you end up in Peru, it's because the temple in Egypt didn't have what you asked for, but the temple in Peru have. And you come back 3 weeks later and you think, thank God my plane was cancelled. I had a great time in Peru, and I become a better person, because they know, they can hear you, they can feel your presence. And that's why it's so important to do this work. But it's become a personal place of pilgrimage. So no book, no DVD can tell you otherwise. They can't tell you what's really there. It's about your direct experience with these places. And before you realize it, you get sucked in. You've lost a lot of friends, but you meet up with some new ones as well. And you become a much better person.
Absolutely. It's okay to lose friends. It's okay to shed friends. I've lost many when I got into this industry, particularly when I expressed I've had an extraterrestrial contact. And especially even now, when people look at my website and they say, who do you channel? I say, well, just go to CanadianAwareness.ca. So when they see the depictions of these beings, a lot of people walk away. And I don't blame them. It's free will to stay. It's free will to not stay, to join, join the party, join the fun. But yeah, you've said some great things. Absolutely. I know there's a lot of different things I can ask you about. I mean, I probably would, my friend, if we had some scotch, I probably would sit here and say, no, what made you write that book about portals? What made you write that book about, the missing gods? What made you write? I would probably go through all these things and pick your brain and not necessarily steal your information, but I would wish to equip myself with the information that you have so that I can become more powerful and stronger when it comes to the information itself. And that's, at the end of the day, I think I said it earlier, Freddie, you and I work from different perspectives. I have enough respect to pay you respect that you deserve. And you certainly are someone that I have, in a way, looked up to simply because you have the real evidence, you have the real research.
I
And,
hope
not only that- and I think everyone should do that. If the person has the right intent, they have the right material, and you have the ability to beautifully format it and put it out there and write it out in these films and books and presentations, and how can someone doubt you? I mean, one of the comments you made one time, not to go off topic, but you said it in your own interview. I watched it. You said a lot of times you get attacked in the industry. And when you do, you present the evidence and then it shuts them up. And that's a one way of being classy about it, but you're right. You have the evidence, you have the books, and your book on crop circles certainly is great. I remember I was reading it and I was like, that's incredible. That's amazing. That's how I feel. Patterns, this, mathematical forms, geometry, these things. I highly, highly, highly recommend the book on the crop circles by Freddie Silva. All of his books, all of his videos can certainly be viewed and observed on his website, invisibletemple.com. Freddie, thank you sincerely for being with us today. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your energy, my friend.
No, likewise. That's what you're doing.
And there we have Freddie Silva. Freddie, thank you very much for being with us this evening. It was an absolute pleasure getting to know you on both professional but also personal level. Look forward to seeing you at the upcoming expos, trade shows, events this 2023. And for the audience, please take a look at Freddie's website at invisibletemple.com or his photography site, freddysilva.com. And he's also on Facebook. I follow that page, wonderful page with tremendous amount of updates. Freddie Silva, again, thank you very much, the audience, for being with me this evening. You could have been anywhere else, but you're here with us. Canadian Awareness Podcast. Dear family, I appreciate it. And I will see you all again next week on another episode of Canadian Awareness Podcast. Good night.